So good morning, everyone. We are now finishing today's topic, which is conversion to UMR from other formalisms and for other languages. So I will talk about the conversion that we did in Prague to get the Czech UMR, which is part of the UMR 2.0 release, and not from a technical point of view, but rather from the point of view, what are the differences between the formalism that we have been using in Prague for a long time for annotation of syntax and semantics, and the phenomena at UMR which we were able to do, and some of them which we had to postpone because we don't know how to do, and there of course might be some things which will always have to be done manually because the specifications are in some cases too different. So this is the actual conversion work is there is a team which works on the Czech UMR project, which is sort of associated with the NSF work on here. But also I should give credit to all of the people who have created the original data, which is something we worked on since 1995, I'd say, and of course doing many releases, not just two, but and adding data from different domains and genres and so on. And this all has been used for the UMR2 conversion. Julia showed a nice picture, so I'm doing more about the Czech. The Czech Republic is in the middle of Europe, as most you probably know, but anyway, and Prague is the middle of the Czech Republic. The population is relatively small when we talk about it here. Prague is maybe 10.5 million now, and Prague is about 10% of that, or more than 10% of the population. The total size of the country is now 78,000 kilometers. The country is historically shrinking, and we used to be the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is now 4 different countries. Then we lost the part which is now part of Ukraine after the Second World War, and then we split with Slovakia. So hopefully 100 years from now I will still be here, not just in the middle of Prague. But so some pictures. This is Prague, where this is the Prague Castle. And in fact, our faculty building is very close under the castle, near the river in the old town. So it's a nice building. The building is also pretty old, not as much as the university itself, which you see on the top right, which is there for more than 600 years. So we will have 700 relatively soon, historically speaking. But the second oldest building is actually the computer science building, which is sort of funny because computer science is the newest school within the university, but it's here. So the church is part of the building, but sort of not part of the school. UFAL, the department I come from, which is the English Translation Institute of Formal and Applied Linguistics, has about 100 researchers, including PhDs who are employed on projects. And it's mostly on the 4th floor in the building. Now, you have an opportunity to actually see all of this on your own eyes. So there is a shameless advertisement for the UMR, which actually someone mentioned in the morning. Yes, the Designing Meaning Representation workshop, I think, is the 6th one. Will take place in Prague on August 4, maybe August 4 and 5, depending how many papers will be there. There's no fee, everything is paid from the projects I actually talked about, and you are all welcome to come just after Vienna's ACL. So there's a weekend to spend on your town, and then there will be the workshop. Okay, so now back to science. The tree banks that we work on they are collectively called the Prague Dependency Treebank family. These are not only for Czech, even though for Czech, of course, we have the largest amount of data, and most research is happening on Czech, but there are also there's also English Treebank annotated with the same formalism, same layers of annotation. There's also an Arabic one, and there are some others, like Federica will show, that the Latin Treebank is also modeled after the way that we did it. Of course, the PDT formalism has not been used for as many tree banks as, for example, the UD, not nearly as many, but for some. But in this case, I will talk about Czech mostly. The original theory is actually maybe 100 years old, but then it was formalized in the 80s by the group of Professor Skal, which you might see from some publications, and that was used as the basis for the actual annotation specification of the Prague dependency tree. So it is a dependency-oriented formalism, which means that we do not have like an underlying syntax using phrase-based, but even the surface syntax is dependency-oriented. So that's more like UD style. But the level I'm talking about now is what we call the tectogrammatic annotation. I will show the layers a little bit later. And this is actually quite similar to what UMR does too. In terms of the specification, which nodes represent concepts and which node represents some structural information, what is, how the non-tree or non-dependency relations are handled by links between nodes in the graph. So again, this is similar to UMR as well. We have a specific means of representing argument structure of predicates, and we will also use like what UMR calls row sets. We have a valence lexicon which covers that, and so on. So this was our basic, and we said, okay, if we have all this information in there, which is relatively similar, at least at the first sight, to UMR, why don't we try automatic conversion to UMR? And maybe we will learn about both formalisms something more, because we will see what can be done and what cannot. So the result is the UMR, which you have been seeing quite a lot on Monday and yesterday, there are some differences which might seem technically difficult, like this is a tree and UMR says it's an acyclic graph, but in fact most of UMR is a tree, and vice versa in the Prague dependency tree bank. Some of the relations are these additional edges which make it a non-tree, not even acyclic, even a cyclic graph sometimes, depends how exactly it's done. So here is an overall picture about what the PDT type annotation looks like. It has layers, so as opposed to UMR, which is like a single layer annotation, and then you have alignments directly to the text tokens. In the Prague dependency case, we have of course, if we have speech, and there are more layers for that, but the three basic layers are morphology, which is linear only, and where we only mark morphological features, and we don't care about structure at all. Of course, we have to take care about tokenization, like in UD, for example, but that's it. And then we have the morphological, grammatical attributes. Then we have what we call surface syntax. In the PDT terminology, it's an analytical layer. This is very similar to UD, except for some differences which are actually convertible quite well, like whether prepositions are the governor or not, or vice versa. Even UD, some people do now SUD, which is the PDT style, and so on. So it can be converted to UD quite well. Of course, this predates UD by 15 years or 20 years, but it's very similar. And then we have the most important part from the UMR conversion perspective is the so-called tectogrammatical layer, which is the semantic layer. So this is what I will be using now for talking about the conversions and the features of the representation which are important for the conversion. So this is a more complex example how the tectogrammatical layer looks like. This is the sentence that has been, of which this is the tectogrammatical annotation. Simplified, of course, there are many more attributes at each node, but this is the core. This is the core values of the attributes, and this is the English clause. As you can see, there is. It's also based. Maybe it's not as visible as in UMR because you don't use the -0, 1, -0, 2 thing, but the predicates are, and the clauses that they represent are the basic thing in the annotation. And then there are arguments which we do not number but have names. I will talk about the conversion to the numbered arguments as well. And then we have other modifiers of the sentence. Now, of course, the nodes in the tectogrammatic representation, because it's a semantic one, are also close to concepts than to words, right? So similar to UMR, when it's even more pronounced that the predicates there are rather concepts, or even not only predicates, sort of everything that's annotated there, even though not fully all the way to real concepts as we know them from cognitive science, but here it is similar. But we still use the words. So, for example, we do not we are not trying to resolve synonyms, for example, right? So that especially for verbs, because we just now work on that to do it. So still the labels are much more lexically based, which is also similar to UMR, but maybe not so abstract as that. The relations, I mean, each of the relations has a label, and the label is the brownish thing here. So it's always in the dependent node, but that's the relation of this node towards the parent node. So, for example, this is elections, and this is parliamentary. So this is an attribute or restriction of which type of election it is. So this says that this is parliamentary elections. Sunday, same thing. So we do not. So this is not. The semantic is also halfway, because it would not say this is time, but it says it's just that the elections were Sunday. So it's Sunday election, not the Monday election. And many more. So the core again are the predicates. That's similar to UMR. And the predicate has arguments. In our case, we have 5 labels for the arguments: actor, patient, effect, addressee, and origin. And of course, some verbs have only 2, and that's what the valency lexicon tells us. So we know exactly for which sense of what verb, which arguments has to be in the annotation, and also we have a definition which one is which. So this can be now used easily. The lexicon was created during the initial years of the annotation, and now it covers essentially all of Czech verbs. So this is the predicate, and these are the 2 arguments. And then we have another clause in this sentence. In this case, the verb to be. This is just like identity or assigning a function to a person sense, and it also has 2 arguments. Who was the person and what function it has. So in this case, it was the candidate. So there are like 2 clauses in this sentence, and then you see in this case only one example of a non-dependency link, and in this case it's a co-reference link. So this says that the who's in the English sentence, which relates to the block, and in Czech we have a similar pronoun here, is actually the block, right? So that the candidate would normally seem to be dependent on whose, but whose doesn't say much about who it is. So we have a co-reference link between the pronoun and the actual antecedent, which in this case is block. There could be many such links, both intrasentential and between sentences, because of course this could go easily across the sentence. Now, this is the same sentence in UMR, so it doesn't look that similar, but it's just because of the graphical, the circles and so on. Otherwise, the structure is not that different. Of course, there are many differences. I could spend a lot of time showing each of them. There is no to be there is instead of that, because there was the word candidate that was converted to a predicate, which we don't do in the Prague style, and so on and so forth. So instead, I have just listed which differences we have encountered when thinking about the rules or the specification for the conversion. So this to be a candidate, I don't even know how to say it in English. To run for an office, right? So that's the Czech verb here, which in UMR would be used as a verb by conversion from the formally noun, which says the candidate of some political party. So that's one difference. So in fact, there are more events if you look at the UMR annotation of the same text, which would be otherwise in the PDT mechanism, and it doesn't matter whether it's Czech or English or any other language. There will be many more predicates in UMR, because we still haven't done completely the derivation morphology and everything that we need for conversion of those nouns, which, however, represent events in the text to the corresponding predicates. The other thing is grounding. So even though we have multi-word expressions annotated and so on, we do not really do explicit grounding, like to Wikipedia or Wikidata or whatever, while UMR and already AMR had specification for how to do it. So that's what we would definitely like to do it, but we cannot do it automatically by the conversion because we simply do not have it in the Prague Treebank aspect. In Czech, it's lexicalized in most cases. There are some cases when it's actually an attribute derived from the verb tense, but definitely in UMR there are more values of what the aspect could be. Again, we cannot fill all of them. Negation in PDT, we are trying to specify scope of negation, which is sometimes important, sometimes it's easy, but which is just the whole thing is negated, but sometimes only partially. So we have a mechanism for doing that. UMR doesn't have that, and also has a different way of representing negation by the polarity attribute. So that's something we also have to do. But in some cases, we are actually losing some information that was originally in PDT. Name entities, we don't annotate them. What we do now, we have a different corpus for identifying name entities, on which we have trained very good tools using LLMs, which now can do 90-something% accuracy for determining person names, first names, last name, organizations, and we will then run it on the data automatically. So we don't do it, and we don't have it there yet, so we couldn't do this. But even if we do it, the automatic name entity recognizer has only, I don't know exactly, 20-something types. But in UMR, we have, there is this very long, very detailed table for name entities, so we won't be able to do it anyway. In such a detail, on the first level maybe yes, but not on the more detailed level. Co-reference, this is an interesting phenomenon which I will have more slides later. In the Prague Treebank is done in a very simple way for all kinds of co-reference types. But in UMR, this is actually represented in many different ways. Some of it is referring to the same node, some of it is handled by inverted argument labels, some of that is handled by some other ways. Some of it is the document level links and so on. So we have to convert the relatively uniform type from the Prague Treebank to all those types. But the information is there anyway because you know from where to where exactly the coreference goes. So in many cases, it's sort of easy to convert it even to those quite different ways of representing coreference in UMR. Temporal relations, we don't really do them. We do infer some semantics in the annotation, like this clause was preceded in time by the other clause, or followed, or repeated in the same time, but we don't have so many details in there. We however, have much more detailed specification for time relations for adjuncts, right? So if we have an adjunct, we have like 7 different things which sort of correspond what the temporal relations UMR are, but we still are not able to completely match them. Now, verb arguments, of course, a big thing in in any semantic formalism. So we have tried to actually work on it separately by converting the Czech valency lexicon, which was used for the Prague Dependency Treebank, into the Probank style, which is used in UMR. And so this yielded some results, and then we used some defaults, and it has pretty good precision anyway, even though the specifications sometimes differ. What arguments I mean, I could have a 5-hour-long talk about what arguments are in Czech and how they differ from Probank, but for the UMR annotation, I think it works quite well so far. The row labels for, now I'm talking about everything else but arguments of verbs, right? So for the adjuncts, the temporal, locations, causes, and so on. So we have a set of them, and these can be converted quite well. We have just one table. It's not perfect. Of course, it will need some manual adjustments, but it works quite well. The problem is that some of the labels we have in PDT are not fine-grained enough to actually correspond to the UMR ones. So, for example, but I think in UMR there is also some confusion. I was not sure for the place. We also have one location. We have 4 location relations: direction, direction through, direction from, and location. But if you only use location, you don't know whether the location means on the table, under the table, next to it. So it's a very important differences, which we do not annotate. We only have the preposition somewhere in the text, but that's all we have. So we are just working on that now to do much more semantic, fine-grained annotation, and then we will be able to do the conversion without topic focus. This is only in PDT only. This is about the information structure of the sentence. And that's not annotated in AMR, so we can just ignore it, even though it does have some relevance for the scope, for example, of negation. So we are happy to have it, because otherwise the scope would not be possible to recognize. Now, there are very different modalities. We have 3 types of modalities: sentence, deontic, and one more. So these, some of them are converted to the abstract predicates. Some of them are thrown away because we don't know what to do with them. But we are trying hard to keep them, because of course they are important. Now, in the Czech, we are following the language actually in this. So this maybe shouldn't be done that way. But if you have a subordinate conjunction, which are quite well defined in Czech, so it's easy to identify which conjunctions are coordinating and which are subordinating. But then from the semantic point of view, some of the subordinating conjunctions actually describe things like conjunction, or the but relation, right? So for the UMR, we have to all convert it to sort of the same style as the op1, op2, and do it. But the thing that we really have had to work hard is that if you have a coordination with lots of adjuncts in it, it's important to distinguish which are sort of the common dependents on all the members of the coordination. Like Peter went home, cooked a cup of coffee, and cleaned up his shoes. Then Peter is sort of the common argument of all the 3 predicates. But there could be something which is only part of one of the members of the coordination. There could be common adjuncts, but there could be also adjuncts which only apply to some of them. So this has to be done carefully, because in UMR, the function, the argument, is in the root node, which sort of connects the parts of the coordination, whether we have it in each of the members. Because we also allow coordinations with different row labels, which UMR does not allow. So this sometimes comes up. He was sitting. Okay, I don't have a good example, but in Czech you can say coordination of, let's say, a time expression and a cause expression. and it's quite natural. So you can treat it as a lot of ellipses all over, and just do two predicates, and then all is fine. Or you can treat it as a coordination of different row labels. So what we do in PDT, we allow it to represent it as a coordination. Then we have lots of attributes for each node, which I was not showing on the graph, but these are, we call it grammar teams. So it's things about like the refer number in UMR, person, things which sometimes are redundant even, but sometimes they are useful for keeping the distinctions between this and there are many more. There is also the document level, which we do not have like a specific section of the annotation, but every link that can go, every non-dependency link that can go from a node to node within a sentence can also go across sentences. So we have a mechanism for the annotation how to mark that the target of the arrow of the link is actually in a preceding or even following sentence. So this is mostly then converted to the UMR document level annotation. Even though some of the things which UMR calls document level, like the temporal ones, if they are between clauses within a sentence, we represent it by an attribute at the clause. So there is no like extra arrow going from somewhere to somewhere. It's just an attribute because the dependency describes the link sufficiently for us. So the differences are attribution. We don't have attribution in PDT, even though the discourse relations are modeled after the Penn discourse treebank, which does use attribution, but we don't. Temporal, I mean, as I said, it's typically within sentence. Coreference across sentences is okay, because once we have that, we can easily do the coref attribute in the document level annotation. And these are actually the sentence I showed on the previous slide was preceded by, two sentences before by a heading which said the Estonians, had parliamentary elections essentially. And so the coreference is to Estonians to vote in the parliament because it was repeated in the sentence. Then we also have the discourse relations. As I said, these are enriched set of the Penn discourse relations, and we also annotate implicit relations which have no conjunction, so it's slightly more rich than you find in the PDIT, but some of them are not represented here, so we just throw them in. So now to summarize how the process looks like. So first we try to go from the PDT structure to the UMR structure in general. Now these structures, as I said before, are not that different, but we have to do a pass through the PDT tree, and we are creating the UMR tree. And if we see a construction in the PDT that's different in UMR, then of course we just cannot copy the node with the same parent in the dependency sense to the UMR. We have to do some transformation on the UMR graph being created. Then we have to focus on predicates, and I will show how we handle the arguments of the predicates. And we do have some abstract predicates, but we are not using that many. And then, of course, all the labeling, like for the predicates, is the conversion of the valency frames to the Treebank-like argument structure, and so on. And then, of course, other attributes, and then finally the alignment. So alignment is fine because then we have the trees completely aligned all the way down to the words through the two more layers of annotation. But you can always find out which words correspond to every node in the annotation. There are sometimes more, sometimes one, sometimes zero, but we still know explicitly which ones they are, so the alignment is easy. So for the graph structure, we just traverse the tree and create the UMR. But the structural changes usually come from co-reference, as I explained that we have one style of co-reference, just a link, but in UMR sometimes it has structural consequences that we have to relink some of the nodes to actually go from the tree to this basically graph, which two edges pointing to the same node in the UMR graph. Then coordination, again, and relabeling is involved, so we have to create this op1, op2, op3, and so on, and then label the parent node with the original labels. If we have different labels, then we have to choose one because the UMR cannot do it. The relative clauses are usually easy, but they involve the change that we have to inverse the relation because the pronoun like which or who is typically co-referred with the actual participant with the antecedent. So in UMR we link to the antecedent from both clauses, clause predicates. And then of course the similar things happen for control verbs. Now the types of the co-reference, right? So the typical way of that what happens in a corpora is that you have this kind of chain, right? Then first you mention someone by name or by very concrete description of the person or thing or event, and then you refer to it by various means, by the pronoun, by a more general verb or more specific word. Sometimes there is zero because this is a control construction. So there are various means of doing that. And then if you include nodes for the zero for the ellipsis, then you actually can have complete co-reference chains, and you know all these things actually describe the same individual or same type. Okay. Now, whether it's within sentence or across sentence, so these are across sentence. This one is within sentence. We have sort of the same link with just different types for some types of relative clauses, but otherwise it's like just a link. But this will be treated differently in UMR. We also can have links forward for cataphors, but that UMR doesn't do that, so we just ignore it. So here's an example. So in the UMR annotation, by using the IDs of the nodes, we can easily represent a shared referent. So in this sentence, if you have admin poll tasted freedom today, and you have sort of two clauses, taste it and be free, then it has the same arg0, right? It was the same actor for both. So in our annotation, there will be a special node for the free, which would be also labeled as an actor. There will be like a generic person pronoun label, and there will be a co-reference link. So, but these two have to be sort of linked to a single node in UMR, and that's what we do. Okay, and of course, the technical means is the label. So this would be the Czech annotation. Simply free has to have an argument 1, so we insert a node, we sort of consider it like an ellipsis, and then there is the link, and then eventually there is only one node in English. So if we have relative clauses, there is also a co-reference link, typically from the pronoun. So this is not ellipsis, there is the pronoun in the subordinate clause, and that's linked by the co-reference link. This is actually called grammatical co-reference because in Czech there are rules for agreement in gender, number, and so on. So it's very easily to identify what is the antecedent just from the sentence. But in the UMR again, it would be that the node would be shared between the two clause predicates again, right? And so well, it will be shared in the sense that there will be just one node, and the link from the person to the second predicate will be just the inverse function. So in this case, there will be no like two links going to the same node, but it will be sort of merged by way of inverting the relation, which originally was just two subtrees in the Czech or in the PDT style annotation. Okay, so this is a similar sentence which has two predicates, to complain and to live. The same person is the actor or argument 0 of both, and the solution of UMR is that, so I'm still using the actor label, but the person is an actor of complain, but also by the reverse label, the person is the actor of live. And then for the intersentential, I've already, this is just a section of the document level annotation in UMR, and all the 3 points are just taken from the PDT links which are across sentences. Coordination, again, I mentioned that in the PDT annotation, this is the actual root of the coordination, and is a sort of an artificial label which says it's a conjunction, like both, in the logical sense, both things will have to be true to be true. We have a conjunction label, but again, this would not transfer across languages very well. So this is what is important, and we have a attribute which says that the two predicates are actually members of the coordination, and this is the common dependent of both, right? So the person or the pronoun, which is actually not expressed in the sentence, is the arg0 of both read and listen. And it is represented like this. So we do not duplicate the node, just out of more readability reasons. We could, because it's equivalent notation, that if we have the person here, we have a personal pronoun, general personal pronoun unexpressed here, and then we link the two. So this is an equivalent notation. In UMR, that's different. We have the and again as the root of the coordination, which puts things and glues them together. Then we have the op1, op2 labels and the two predicates. And if there is a shared thing, then there could be links even from more elements of the coordination. So because of the attributes that we have available in PDT, it is easy to determine what is the common dependent and what is the actual nodes in the coordination. So it is deterministic, but we have to convert it structurally and change the labels. Now, ellipsis is another phenomenon which we have handled in quite detail in PDT, and there are many types of ellipses. I talk about the ellipsis and the semantic level. So in this case, the two are prevailing. And one is that if an argument is missing, which in Czech happens often because it's a prodrop language, like many languages we have been talking about here, so often the subject is left out because it's completely understood from concept or from the morphological features of the verb and so on. So we don't have to say it, but we need, in the semantic annotation, we have to give it a label. Was it the subject, which was the actor, or was it the subject, which was actually the patient, and so on. So we insert the node for that. It has no links to the surface text because there is no word in the surface which would be related to, but it has its node in the annotation. So that's one type. The second type of ellipsis is if the sentence structure is such that we would have trouble determining the dependent node of some of the concepts in the sentence. So that typically happens in coordination. So if you have a sentence like, Mary likes Bach, like the author, and Susan Beethoven. So the predicate is missing. Predicates are important. In the structure, you always say, okay, there is a predicate and the argument. Now, what would these two nodes be dependent on if we do not put like an artificial zero node into the structure? Right? We would have some trouble. On the surface level, we have some rules and labels how to do it. UD has very specific tools to do it as well. But now we have the freedom to add nodes, which we normally cannot do in UD or surface syntax. so we add the node for like. And we mark it appropriately that this is just a copy of another verb because it's understood from the context and so on. And we have a regular structure and then everything holds as usual, except the node is marked as inserted node or generated node, empty node, whatever you want to call it. So this example in the middle is actually a sentence with two such nodes, not only one. And it says that Peter drinks red wine and Hanka white. So there are two such nodes which would make the sentence, be in pieces, because we first need the predicate, which means that Hanka also drinks, which is understood from the concept, and that she drinks not white chocolate or white something, but white wine. Because, philosophers might disagree that it's clear from the sentence, but I would say it is. So we have to add both the predicate for drinking, so that we can say that Hanka is the actor of drinking. And also we have to add the node for wine, because otherwise the white attribute would be just hanging out of nowhere. Because it's a description of which type of wine. Okay, so these two nodes are added in order to describe it better. Now, in UMR there are different solutions to this. I would say it also uses edit nodes for these concepts, but because of the sharing mechanism, in some cases it will be shared together. I'm not sure what we will do with red wine and white wine, because in fact the Czech annotation is much more lexical than semantic, because there is no such thing like white wine. White wine is actually not white, so in fact it's a multi-word expression. Because white wine is yellow. So maybe white wine and red wine should be represented as a single concept, which is for red wine and rosé and red wine. But if we stick to that white and red are attributes of wine, then we can do it that way. But I think UMR should be careful not to confuse this, because then, if you have one wine in the sentence, that probably would convey the bad message that, they are both drinking, mixing red and white. So that has to be done, carefully. And then one of the big problems we had was to create events in the UMR annotation, because, as I said before, many of the events in Czech and in the PDT scheme are represented by nouns, or sometimes adjectives, or sometimes even some strange idiomatic constructions, sometimes completely implicit in the sentence. So this would be really hard to do, or was hard to do so far, because we don't have good tables that would tell us that the candidate actually means the verb to run, even though morphologically it could be derived, but we don't have such resources yet. And we have some, but not completely reliable at the point, so we couldn't do it. And of course, even if we had that, we would have to have much richer resource, which would also say, that the restriction attribute of the noun should become arg0 of the verb, because sometimes it could become arg1 of the verb. So those would be quite complex resources to actually use to be able to convert from, noun-based eventives to the actual events in English. Yes.
So when you say noun-based event, then but still you are calling it noun, then where does the tense marker and go?
Well, in Czech, the tense marker for noun-based events is non-existent. So you have to guess.
Oh.
So it's like I think that's what Bert said about Chinese, right? That in some cases there is no marking for plurals or tense aspect. Well, aspect yes, because in Czech aspect is very often lexicalized. So we have two verbs which look quite similar, but there are some extra phonemes in the middle which actually tell you about the aspect. So the aspect can be derived from
that aspect to mark on the noun.
So it's not marked explicitly, but just from the lexical unit, we can derive whether it's an iterative aspect or whether it's a perfective aspect or imperfective. That can be done in some cases, but the tense, no.
But when you are talking about nominal events, are you referring to verbal derived nouns or?
Sometimes it depends what you call derivation, right? So there are some very regular derivations,
Yeah.
which are just done by suffixing the verb, let's say, or some small changes in the root or something, and you know exactly what it is. You can easily map the arguments from the noun back to the verb and so on. But there are also some other nouns which are clearly eventive nouns, but the relation to the actual verb is not phonological, or it's not clearly phonologically conditioned, so you can't say. So for example, for building, so we have the verb to build, and in Czech, we have suffix sort of representing the English ing, so we can change the verb form, which is stavět in Czech, and then stavění, so you change t to ni, and that's like in English building. Building in the sense that the building is being done of something, right? But in Czech we have another word which is spelled stavba, so that has the same root, but the ending is bie. It has nothing to do with the regular verbal derivation, and that's the sense of building as an entity, right? Which of course had to be built before, but if you refer to it without actually referring to the process of being built, then you do not want to convert it to an event. And in fact, it's not an event; it's the result of an event.
Yes.
So there are many cases like this which are not clear how exactly they should be annotated. And then you have all these incorporation like teach and teacher, right? So you have teach and a teacher, but teacher is actually the actor of teach, not the event of teaching. We have a different word for teaching, which is, and again, the word for teaching could also mean many other things, not just the process of teaching. Right? So this is in fact a complicated phenomenon which was not easy to do, at least not now for the.
But for those cases, you're not consider things like, for instance, storm, right? That are non-derived, but they represent an event from a semantic point of view. Those cases you not annotate in terms of aspect.
No, because even if we are able to correctly determine the event label, the concept, like storm.
Yeah.
I mean, in Czech we have a verb for it, so it will be okay.
For instance, in English, something similar, right?
Yeah.
In Czech.
So, but to determine the aspect, we would probably have to just use the context correctly, right? Because storm can be continuing storm, but it could be a storm which has ended, and many other, things could be repeated. Storm.
Yeah, we don't have those traditional tests to see if it is what kind of event it is. Yeah.
And even the timing, the tense or the temporal distinction, it's completely unclear from the noun. I mean, we just have to use the context to determine whether the storm already happened or will happen before the other event in the sentence. That's not clear. So the noun itself doesn't say anything. Okay. And we also had some trouble distinguishing between events and states, but that's not that difficult, except that for states there are many abstract predicates in UMR, and we also would have to find out how exactly to deal with those. Now, I have to go quickly, but I would like to do this because this is something that we really work hard on it. We have, as I said, we have this, what we call the PDT Valex lexicon. It's a valency lexicon that has been built and used for the PDT annotation. And so it's a lexicon which is completely consistent and compatible with the annotation, uses exactly the same labels, the IDs of verb senses and so on. And it is used and it's also distributed as part of any PDT corpus. So this is the lexical resource that contributed quite a lot to consistency of annotation for the predicates. And but it's based on the theory that I mentioned from the 80s, 70s and 80s, which has different view of what verbal arguments are. So it distinguishes like two different dimensions of what an argument is, and calls these five, which normally in Anglo-Saxon linguistics you would call them arguments, but we call them different. Doesn't matter how we call them, but we say that these five are sort of the arguments which are not the free modifications of the verb. This will always be somehow dependent on the sense of the verb, which ones of those you can use. And then for each individual verb, you choose of those five. Actually, some of them have zero, but typically have at least an actor as an argument. And you can have verbs which have five. Most transitive verbs have the first two, and so on. But if you look at the Treebank frame files, the row sets, then the system is slightly different. So in Czech, the first two are always these, right, regardless of semantics. But in the Treebank, sometimes the argument zero is not used, like for the glass broke, so the glass would be R1, right? So for us, I mean, in Czech we don't have such constructions. There is always a morphological marker or reflexive particle or something which makes it easier to use the system that I talked about, because of course, as in English, these are sort of English-centric, so these ones are Czech-centric in a way, because there was the original theory that would develop for that. So the conversion is not straightforward, but we have both the corpora, we have a parallel Czech-English corpus, we have the Simpson class ontology, which is multilingual, Czech, English, Spanish, German. So we could use these resources to actually do the mapping, because these resources sort of link the arguments through semantic roles, and therefore you can do at least some of the mappings automatically. And so 43%, not quite half, but out of the 42,000 frames in PDT-Valex, we were able to convert automatically. And because in the annotation we have the exact ID of the frame, meaning that for the annotation we could exactly pick whether it's arg0 and 1, and which one is which, or whether it's arg1 and 2, or whatever. So this would matter. For the rest, we have some kind of default mapping, because, of course, statistically speaking, in most cases, these first two map to arg0 and 1. So the evaluation shows that there are still some errors, but we were able to do this quite well. Then for the adjuncts, which we have 38 types of adjuncts, maybe 40 now, we just have a fixed table. Not perfect, but again, for most cases, it works well to map them to the UD arguments, to the UMR arguments like colon, place, colon, clause, and so on. Okay, now, Federica again, please.
Okay, I'm gonna be very quick this time, but basically everything that you have heard so far from Professor Hajič about the PDT also can be applied to Latin. And the reason for that is that we have a resource, a Treebank for Latin, that is annotated exactly in the same way as the Prague Dependency Treebank. And that's the Latin Dependency Treebank. As you can see here, like this tree looks exactly like a PDT tree would look like. And this is great news because it means that we can apply the same conversion process. Of course, there are some details that we have to adjust. For example, study verbs are defined lexically, and of course they're different in Latin than in Czech. Or negation, there's some lexical information which is leveraged. But overall, the conversion process is really the same, which is good news because Latin is also not as well resourced as Czech, so any help that we can get is really valuable. However, so Latin is included in the second release of UMR, but you will not find the converted sentences yet. As of now, in the second release, there are only 50 sentences which have been annotated manually. That is important also because Latin is the first historical language to be included in UMR, so we kind of had to figure out how to apply the guidelines and everything. And then it's always good to have some gold data. but we at the same time we have been experimenting with these 700 sentences with the conversion. These 700 sentences correspond only to a subset of the LDT, one author, but there's more that can be converted and will be converted. As of now, this converted data has the same quality as the Czech data that is part of the release, which means that it's ready for the next release. You have here two UMRs, on the right the gold one, the manually annotated one, and here on the left the generated one. As you can see, they're not exactly the same. The converted one is a bit longer, but overall it's correct enough. There's few differences. For example, again, assigning aspect, as we've discussed already, is always often non-trivial. And then entity nodes such as, again, person or thing that I was discussing also in UD conversion are not exactly correct because, for example, with the affectee, it should be an entity node, but we still have the lexicalized pronoun, which shouldn't be there. It's the first person plural pronoun. We should just have a person node. But overall, like, the conversion works well enough. The conversion process for Latin also requires some extra work to basically to have predicate argument information. There are two valency lexicons that are available for Latin, but none of them was ready to be exploited as it was for UMR purposes or for the conversion. So the first version is particularly interesting because it's built upon the LDT tectogrammatical layer, which means it could be used for automatic conversion of frames and roles. But there are some problems, such as that it is quite small, it doesn't contain definitions, and with a language like Latin, for which we have no native speakers, that's a bigger problem than it is normally. But yeah, it is very important that it is linked to the grammatical layer. On the other hand, we have this second valency lexicon for Latin, which is much bigger. It contains definitions, but here there are no examples, which is also a problem for the same reason as before. And it is not linked to any other resource, for example, the LDT. So what we had to do in order to have a lexical resource that can be used for UMR annotation was merging operation. Basically, combined these two resources in order not to lose any information, but collected in the same place that it is usable for UMR, and the outcome is this Valix for UMR resource for Latin, which also has now Treebank-like arguments, like 0, arg 1, and so on, instead of the actor patient that Hajič was just discussing. And that is it for Latin. It was a very short overview.
Okay, thanks. So I would like to conclude with at least some of the lessons that we have learned. I originally thought that I could bring much nicer structure of what are the differences and what are the same things and what are the big difficulties, what are the small difficulties at which level. But we still don't have deep enough experience from that to actually tell you. I hope we will be able to do it later because we are still working on improving the conversion based on the results so far. So hopefully for the UMR 3.0 we will have the same Czech data but in much better shape, even though we won't be able to do all 3 million words manual corrections, but maybe we will have some, and we will definitely have some measurements as well. But for now, so what is nice about the PDT that the sort of the actual annotation guidelines are based on a